What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the EPM Show. This is all things enterprise performance management, and we're here to give you an unfair career advantage. And today is a big first for us here at the EPM Show. We welcome back our first ever repeat guest, and that's Bhavik Vashi. As a reminder, he's the managing director of Asia Pacific at Carta, and he now works with VCs and startup founders every day, in addition to having more than a decade of experience under his belt at Anaplan. And he returns to the show today to talk with us all about the future of EPM. If you want to go back and listen to our first episode with Bhavik, there's this little section at the end where he talks about EPM 3.0 and what it's going to look like. It was so good that we wanted to have him back. So in this episode, we dive deeper into what it looks like moving forward. That includes what some of the newest and most innovative startups are doing in the EPM space, how the economics in the APAC region are leading to an innovative commercial model for software in general that will impact EPM, and also what generative AI means for the future of EPM solutions and how to thrive as an EPM professional in an AI world. This episode is full of practical examples and insights to some really big and tough questions that a lot of professionals are dealing with today. We're so glad we had him back on the show. The sequel definitely delivers, y'all. Check it out.
We have a first for the show today. We are bringing back an incredible guest, Bhavik Vashi. Welcome back to EPM Show.
I am so honored to be the first person who got called back for seconds. I think I'm going to have to add that to the display at some point.
It's an honor. I've already said last time was so good that I hope I was not there. I hope I don't mess it up this time. Bhavik mentioned, how when you have a sequel, you never know if it's going to actually live up to the first, but we're still optimistic here. So here we go. Chad, I'll kick to you.
Absolutely. Bhavik, great to see you again. Just for the group, obviously, this is episode number 2. We normally do a 60-second kind of flyover of your career. If you're listening and you want that, go listen to the first one. But I'll just give a quick rundown. Bhavik, I know you spent about 10 years at Anaplan, saw them from Series B up to the private equity acquisition with Thoma Bravo. And in our first episode, we had a lot of great conversations around what that journey looked like. It was an episode of reflection and how you saw Anaplan go from this financial planning tool up to this horizontal platform for a business user, because you were customer obsessed. You had some really gnarly projects that you all used to just kind of grow and innovate in the business. You went from being in San Francisco to growing the Asia Pacific market. And then at the end there, and this is why we're back, we talked a little bit about EPM 3.0, which is what we want to center on today. But before we do that, I've got a fun, personal question for you off of our first episode. In that episode, you said that your favorite Hollywood movie was Hitch with Will Smith.
I did, yes.
But what we did not discuss is what your favorite scene of that movie is. So what is your favorite scene in the movie Hitch?
Oh, that's a good question. Obviously, him teaching him how to dance, that's a classic, right? The throw it away, right?
Q-tip.
Yeah, Q-tip. Q-tip, exactly. So that's a classic, but I think that one's a little bit mainstream, right? I think they might have used it in the trailer, but I think the other one, which I weirdly love, is when he has that allergic reaction and his whole face is messed up and he's running through, I think, a CVS or something, trying to and he just downs a whole thing of cough syrup and then he's loopy for the night. Yeah, that whole sequence is adorable.
Yeah, I love it. He's sipping on Benadryl, looking in the mirror like, come on, fix my face.
Yeah, that's a good one. I haven't seen that movie in way too long. I need to rewatch that.
Yeah, that's one of my wife and I's favorite. I think one of my favorite scenes is when they're on the jet skis and he tries to get on hers and he accidentally kicks her in the face. That's so good. So good. Yeah. Well, hey, this is going to be the sequel that is just even better than the first one, right?
Yeah.
So,
speaking of which, Hitch needed a sequel. I'm
that's
just
what I was about to say.
That was a missed opportunity. We definitely could have run that back.
We need
Definitely.
we need a right to will and make it happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that movie was actually teed up perfectly at the end too. I feel like they could have done something with it. But anyway, neither here nor there. So Bhavik, EPM 3.0, what I would love to do starting out is if you could just tell us a little bit about what you're doing now at Carta and how that kind of impacts your view of what you think the future of EPM is going to look like.
Yeah, sure. It's been super weird and interesting and fun to be outside of the EPM world, at least officially. I guess I'm still on an EPM show podcast, so I'm clearly not made it that far. But yeah, look at Carta.
Finding your way
know,
back.
yeah, I'm always at. No, but it's really interesting. So Carta, I mean, those of people who aren't familiar, we are also an enterprise software company, but we build two main products. I'm oversimplifying. One is for startup founders. So it's to help them with everything from fundraising to managing their cap table and issuing equity to employees to doing fair market valuations of their company, issuing compensation to new employees, et cetera. And then the other product is actually for venture capital firms, where we offer fund administration as a product and a service. And so we're basically running end to end the back office of a VC, which is probably, you can start to see like the parallels of the Anaplan experience and kind of like why it makes sense at Carta. But I think the unique thing about it is now being outside, all I do all day, every day is meet with founders who are starting companies or meet with VCs who are investing in founders who are starting companies. And so I feel strangely overexposed to the startup ecosystem. And within that, my eyes and my heart naturally gravitate to a lot of the startups that are B2B, trying to build an application software broadly in the data, analytics, business intelligence. And like I often say, sometimes they don't realize, but they're kind of in the EPM space as well. And so just seeing kind of the next wave, like probably even beyond 3.0, they might be the 4.0, if the ones that actually make it, is super interesting. And just think most of them, interestingly, don't come from the EPM space. They see the problem and they're solving it, but it's not like they've come from generations of seeing these tools and stuff. So it's kind of interesting to hear their fresh perspective. And then they meet someone like me who's like, oh, I've seen this movie before and I have this pattern recognition thing happening in my brain. And I think that's been kind of probably one of the more interesting and fun and weird parts of my job right now. But I'm super excited about some of the stuff that I see happening, often because they're unconstrained by building off of what they've seen before. They're coming in totally fresh, thinking they don't even realize that like I said, they're building EPM. So that's kind of cool.
So that's a great take in terms of like the fresh, hey, they have no idea maybe they hadn't heard of EPM before as a construct, as a term. But when you're using this term, Bhavik, of 3.0, and then we'll talk about 4.0 in a second, how would you characterize EPM 3.0?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I think they're broadly the companies that are already institutionally funded. They've already got a product out in the market that they are selling and is generating revenue, and are probably founded post 2016 or 17, right? Like from inception date, like loosely, right? I think there are a couple that are like reinventing themselves, but I'd say most of them kind of popped up after that. That's kind of what I think of as EPM, because those are the companies that are out there right now, basically eating into Anaplan and obviously the legacy as SAP, IBM, Oracle market share, right? Like they're coming to play in the category that Anaplan created, right? So anytime you're a category creator, other people are like, wow, this is a category. We can be the Anaplan but this, or the Anaplan and this, or something like that. And so it's cool. It's kind of like Salesforce, right? Like CRM. Okay, now there are other CRMs, right? And then so on and so forth. So that's kind of what I think about when I think of EPM 3.0. So
when we were talking about it in our first episode, I think you characterized EPM 3.0 with two main features, whatever you want to call it. The first was some type of proprietary calculation engine. And then the second was an innovative commercial model where either they're making it so easy to use, they can give it away for free, and Excel users are going to start picking up and learning it. But there's significant challenges with that. I think you even mentioned that you weren't seeing that in the market today. Can you kind of connect like maybe what you're seeing at Carta today with some of those new companies and some of these features potentially coming out, or are you seeing that start to come to fruition, or what are your thoughts there?
I think those to me are the two variables that give you an edge, right? Even if you don't have those things, like you can make money and you can have success and you can have customers that love you and you can build a business. I firmly believe that because, like I said, when you create a category, there's more than enough to go around, right? Like as we know, every company in every industry in every geography needs an EPM product, whether they realize it or not, right? So there's plenty of market out there. But I think those two things are what I look for as as an investor, as an angel investor, for example, where I say, okay, yeah, that's something that I would want to put my money behind or get involved with in some way. And I see a few of those, popping up. I'm overexposed in Asia. I've been here for 7 years. So, that's kind of where I'm seeing them. But I think what we see here a lot more, I'd say, is on the commercial model more so than the proprietary calculation engine. Because I think building a calculation engine is hard. It requires a pretty advanced grasp of mathematics and computer science and, building a more performant multidimensional calculation engine. There's a high barrier to entry, whereas a commercial model, anybody really can come up with one as long as you've understood your user or your buyer really, really well. And you are very clear about what segment you want to go after and what problem you're solving and how you're pitching it, all those other things. Basically anybody, either who went to business school or just has, worked in business and kind of has exposure to those variables. And so we're seeing a lot more of those. And then specifically in Asia, we're seeing a lot more that are user driven and a lot more that are focused on kind of down market, what we would traditionally consider down market, because, well, that's what the market has. I mean, Asia has more than, I think now, half or at least more than a third of the world's population, right? But more, getting up to half with China and India being in there as well. And so that there's lots of users, lots and lots of users, not the issue. The issue is their spending power, right? Because if you start looking at like GDP per capita and stuff like that, all of a sudden you're like, wait, how are they going to pay 6 figures annually, 7 figures annually for my software? And so now you're trying to solve for hitting the masses with something that is inherently a bit complex, right, in terms of planning and multidimensionality. And you need to do it at a price point which makes sense and is very accessible for markets whose unit economics look super different because of the lower labor costs, lower cost of living in general. So it's like, in the US, we used to at least sell Anaplan as a productivity and an automation value proposition. It's like, you guys are spending so much time cleaning data and aggregating data and not enough time analyzing the data. That's the pitch. And we'll allow you to do that. And that was good enough. It made sense. The math made sense. But, if you go to Vietnam, they're like, yeah, but if I pay you $50K a year, I'll hire 3 people and it's not an issue. And now all of a sudden you're like, well, what's the pitch now? Why would you do this? And so they're all having to solve for 2 things. One is making those economics work, which means your sales cycle has to be totally seamless. You can't invest in like super expensive salespeople to run long sales processes and close deals. It needs to be seamless and ideally all inbound, like the dream. And therefore the product has to be so easy to use and so intuitive that people can pick up and start using it without training and without being sold to. And it has a certain virality to it. And then you can take advantage of software gross margin profile where you're like, hey, I built the software once, even if I charge you $10 a year for it, eventually I can still make out ahead because it was a one-time cost to build a software and I'm monetizing it perpetually, right? Minus the cloud hosting costs and some other things. So that's the commercial challenge and the business model that we see a lot of in Asia, and a lot of people trying to figure out how they are going to solve that. And naturally, it tends to start more on BI side, right? So just giving you a sense of what's happening, not necessarily like the complex forecasting and modeling, but just more the reporting and making sense of large volumes of data and stuff like that and adding value really quickly. And then kind of going backwards from reporting back to forecasting and modeling. So broadly, that's what we see in Asia from an early stage startup perspective.
What really resonated for me in hearing that is the emphasis on, in order for this to work, the product has to have a certain amount of virality to it. It's like product-led growth, like truly like, hey, this is so good. This is so intuitive. This is so incredibly well designed and helpful to me in my role. Talk to me more about when you use that term user kind of generated growth. What does that look like in the context of like enterprise SaaS? And so are
Yeah.
most of these companies that you're seeing in Asia, like they have the aspirations to be like full-fledged playing with the Anaplans of the world maybe one day, even if they're like in a lower tier market. What does that look like from a user generated growth perspective?
I've also seen two broad approaches to this. It's, again, oversimplification almost certainly, but there's kind of, I call it the modeler centric approach, right? Where you're trying to minimize the amount of change management that someone has to go through, assuming spreadsheets is the baseline, right? And we've seen this for years. It's like, okay, so you assume everyone knows Excel and you're trying to minimize the change that they have to experience to get onto your product. And so you try to make it look and feel and act as much like that thing as possible because you're leveraging on a skill set which you believe already exists, and it does, right? And so I think just to throw out a few names in the 3.0, like I think Data Rails, Cube, for example, I think both of them have taken a much more like spreadsheet interface, maybe even integrating into your Excel forward approach in terms of how they think about themselves, versus the other one, which I kind of call the wizard approach, which is you try to assume that the person also doesn't use Excel. And so now you're taking someone from their brain or how they might think of something on a whiteboard or very conceptually, right? And almost create a workflow and a wizard interface through which they could almost interact with the software as if it was a finance business partner for them. And that software is then able to create what we would all know on the back end is a multidimensional model, right? And so you're really walking them through how many years are you projecting for? 3. Okay, so it then creates time dimension and figures the rest out. And it's like, and what are you trying to plan for? And how do you do that? And like, it really kind of tries to engage with you in that way. And so we're seeing, so I kind of see those two as like one's much more like techie forward and you expect all the people who use Excel to maybe go download that. And then one is like very user based and you're going straight, you're still kind of going to the top of the organization and saying, hey, if you're a startup founder, if you're the first CFO at a company and you have to build all these pretty important models and plans and you're constantly in just Excel and spreadsheets and other stuff, like let us make this easier for you. And also, by the way, there's a ton of pattern recognition there about how a B2B company is going to create a P&L or a pro forma versus how a B2C company will. And you can create templates and you can create accelerators and wizards and very different onboarding approach, I guess.
So the wizard approach,
Yeah.
you almost kind of positioned it as conversational. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's like, how many years do you want to forecast for? 3. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll do this. How does AI and ML, like, how does that impact, like, say, the wizard approach? Because that's almost conversational, kind of like generative AI. I think about when I use ChatGPT or some of the tools that use ChatGPT as the engine. It's very much question and answer, and it's going to be your finance business partner, if you will. So how do you see that? How do you see the integration of AI and ML and using that in EPM moving forward?
I think you hit it like right on the head, right? So yeah, I think it has first of all, I think it has a huge role to play. Like, overarching statement, I am a big believer that this is actually a game changer. I always compare it to like Web3 that had like equal buzz, but I wasn't sure what the applications or use cases for blockchain exactly were going to be. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm just dumb. I just don't get it. But I think we're seeing that the adoption curve on that is going to be a lot longer. Whereas AI's adoption curve, we can already feel is a lot quicker because it's way easier to figure out, okay, I can see how that solves this problem, that problem, and varying degrees of impact that I think it can have. So back to EPM, yeah, there's like a bunch of different ways that I think it can make sense. Some were already happening, right? Like just AI. If you think of AI, you are like, okay, AI is when the EPM tool can finish your formula for you. That is AI. That's predictive. Or if you could kind of search your model for certain information that you were looking for instead of actually having to go through all the clicks to find the table or list or grid or whatever that you've like some element of that is AI as well. And so there, and then obviously predictive, like, just incorporating machine learning or predictive forecasting as one of the many versions of the forecast and say, hey, here's what the machine says it's going to be. Here's what your bottoms up is. Here's what the top down is. Compare, choose. So we've seen some of those things coming in already, but I think specifically large language models changes exactly what you said, the interaction with the user as well. So you can have that conversation, right? Prompting type conversation with some kind of AI. And you can really imagine it because most EPM products these days have opened up their API library. So anything that you could have done through the interface by clicking and pointing and dragging can be done through an API call. And so if you think about it, if you program a large language model to understand what you're prompting for, understand how to translate that prompt into a sequence of API calls that says when he says he needs to forecast for 3 years, you need to open time settings, extend for 3 years, apply that to a module. It can pretty quickly figure out what that would require. I mean, any solution architect in the EPM space knows in their head already what it means. So it's just automating that part, automating all the hands-on keyboard part of it, and just skipping straight to the outcome. So I think the prompt-based modeling almost has huge potential. And I think that's really interesting. And it's not just the modeling. I think a lot of people are starting with the modeling, and I understand why. It demos super well. It's a great hook. But I think the real value beyond that will be on the data side as well. So you think about like every EPM project, the devil is always in the data, like making sense of the actuals to then create the plan and the forecast and the drivers and the assumptions and all of that. And I think there's huge, huge potential for AI in data cleansing, master data management, data mappings, manipulations, all the stuff that you used to have to build a data hub for, or all kinds of mapping dashboards and all kinds of stuff that we've all done for many, many years. All of that should theoretically kind of go away and either be done automatically or be done through that same wizard interface that the end user themselves could do it. It wouldn't require like a system administrator to like set up the infrastructure for you before you could do the fun part. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. We could probably talk about it forever, but I think it's going to change the way that you onboard onto an EPM product completely.
So Bhavik, that was some of the more like, I guess, tangible examples that we've heard when it comes to like, oh, AI is coming, and what's that mean for people, and what's that mean for our capabilities and our platforms. I think that was really helpful to just kind of say, hey, these are like some tangible use cases of how we're seeing it play out, and the world's really about to be changed significantly, and our EPM world is going to be enhanced significantly by leveraging these tools. I think it's a great segue for the talent side of this, the career side of this, of putting yourself back as a solution architect, as a model builder back in the day, if you know the way you started your career. What advice would you have?
He was a model building guru, Blake.
That's right. Excuse me, I forgot the guru.
Don't forget guru.
I hope Anaplan still has some cool titles like that internally. Guru.
I think safe to say post private equity acquisition.
Probably not.
That's not
Probably
top of the
not.
list.
Wait, you don't think Tomo Bravo has that in their org chart, all their gurus and their Jedi Knight status?
I do not think that's Orlando's style, from what I can tell.
But when you put yourself back in those shoes, Bhavik, what advice would you have for succeeding, for thriving in this space, moving forward into 3.0, into 4.0?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not just EPM. Every industry is thinking about like, what does this mean for human jobs, and what does this mean for upskilling and reskilling and all of that? And there's a fair bit of trepidation. I think just kind of unknown. Like people see it as like the modern industrial revolution. You had all these people like kind of working, all of a sudden machines came in. But look, like humanity and society moved on, right? And like more and more greater percentage of the eligible workforce became knowledge workers, and kind of the shift from blue collar to white collar and so on and so forth. So I think like I would first say that don't freak out. I think we'll all have jobs that are just going to look very different and probably feel very different, and like what we are asked to do is going to be very different. I think like I said, specifically like your hands-on keyboard may not be as valued as it was, especially in the early days of Anaplan, where it's like if you could actually build a model, you were like one of the few. Whereas I think it's going to be much more shifting to your understanding of how businesses make decisions and the business process side of it, and also the human psychology side of it, right? Because it's not just like academic, like this is how you forecast demand, here's ABC, XYZ, in the supply chain concept. Like you could learn all that as well, actually. And the problem is anything that's in a book can also be in a machine. I always tell people that. So it's like, it's not mastering the academics of it. They're going to feed all the textbooks into large language models, and AI is just going to have that on cue for you. It's more about understanding when to apply a specific concept or a framework or a methodology to a specific context. And that context is going to be the maturity of the company, the region, the competitive landscape, like all these there's so much context for every business on how should they make the decision, how should they plan it, how should they forecast it, how should they think about their business. The act of getting your hands on the keyboard and making it happen, just from a pure execution perspective, I think that's going to minimize in relevance. And I think what's going to continue to be, more important is just your ability to really be that consultant and be translating. And it's not just like functional consultant only. I think it's translating what the business needs from a functional perspective, and then in your mind, translating it into a application or a type of software solution that would enable that. And then that's where the human psychology element comes in as well, of like, what will people use? How will they use it? How will they trust it? How will they enjoy interacting with it? And humans, luckily for all of us, are irrational by design. So that is what makes it impossible for machines, because they literally cannot predict or figure out why we do the things we do, which is why I think humans will always have jobs solving other humans.
I've harped on this, I think, a couple of times on this episode or different podcasts that we've done, but the World Economic Forum recently came out with what are the top skills that people are going to be looking for in jobs over the next decade. And creative thinking and curiosity are at the top of the list. Because to your point, the technical side of fingers on a keyboard, things that need to get done, will be able to be more and more automated. So what's going to set you apart in your career is the application of those tools to solve humans' problems. I'll get you out of here on this question. Can you maybe give like a practical example or takeaway for someone who's like, well, I'm really good at putting my fingers on the keyboard, but maybe I'm not as good at the creative thinking side? How can someone exercise that and become a better translator and grow into that true consultant so they can continue to thrive in their career?
Yeah, great question. Super
very open-ended and lots of different answers.
No, I'll try to make them. I love giving like very specific examples because I don't know, I did find them easier to relate to. When I was on the other side also, like there would be a lot of like abstract talk and I'm like, I don't know, what does it mean? And so for me, like let's say you're a model builder today out there in the community, or a solution architect even. I think one of the more like tactical, tangible things that I would suggest doing is make sure you understand what you're building, right? And why you're building it. Like, so you've got a user story, you're executing on it, amazing. You've built it, you're going to meet the success criteria and you're feeling phenomenal and you're emptying your bucket and you're getting ready for your sprint review. Like that's the situation. I would really think about like after you've built something, load in actual data, your customer's actual data, and then look at the model as if you were them and try to understand why they've given you that user story. Like, why did they decide to plan T&E by using a cost per head driver-based forecast, which averages the cost per head over the last 3 months and projects it forward, instead of using zero-based budgeting for that particular line item, or instead of using overall like run rate forecast for that particular GL account? And why 3 months and why not 6? And why did they have to apply seasonality to that particular line and not other lines? All those things that you are building. And sometimes it's really like easy to get caught up in just building it and churning it out and like making sure you're ready. But if you have this amazing opportunity, this unbelievable exposure to literally how the sausage is made, how the decisions are made. And so just take those pauses at every step of the way to understand what you're building, why you're building it, question it. And oftentimes you'll end up being a better consultant as a result. And you'll just be like, you might actually have a revelation that you can bring back to the customer. Like, hey, I noticed like, on this particular product, you're doing revenue like this, but on this other one, you did like this. And wouldn't it make sense because that one tends to have like seasons and it's in season in, Christmas time. And therefore you would expect a spike. And so if you do the last 3 months, you won't factor that. Like you'll start having these realizations and now you've crossed over to the other side where you're thinking about the models from a business perspective and the decision perspective rather than the hands-on keyboard. And as soon as you start doing that, they're going to be like the customers will start dragging you more and more into those conversations. And then you do it for one and another. Honestly, this is the kind of like dirty little secret in consulting. Once you did, I would say 3 projects of companies in the same industry, you could kind of position yourself as a subject matter expert because it's like, I think if you've seen it 3 times, you've seen it probably 3 more times than the people that you're working with. And therefore you're like, well, in my experience, I've seen at other companies, and you're already making that transition. And then the more you do it, the more, you confident you feel about your point of view as well.
That's a really great tactical takeaway on just embracing curiosity, asking why, and trying to really get into the mind of the business and understand why they're making their decisions. Bhavik, if people want to reach out to you and connect, where can they find you?
Yeah, best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. I am pretty like old school. I don't really have a Twitter. I don't have a lot of like the social media. I'm not on Snapchat, not on TikTok.
So
but
not
find me
TikTok.
on LinkedIn.
Okay.
No. Find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me. Just drop something. Heard you on the EPM show. Want to talk EPM? I'd be happy to have that conversation.
Awesome. You heard it here first, folks. No TikTok. LinkedIn. Thanks, Bhavik. Appreciate it. Amazing episode as always.
The sequel delivers. Awesome stuff.
I love it, guys. Thanks for having me on again. Seriously.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Wherever you're consuming this, if it's YouTube, if it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we appreciate you. Make sure you're subscribed. We have a lot more amazing guests on the way, a lot more great content. We're doing our best to bring you value and have fun while we do it. And we really want this to be a career advantage listening to this show, and we want you to enjoy it. So it means a lot. Make sure you're subscribed for what's to come. And also, if you're up for it, it would mean a lot if you leave us a like, a comment, a rating, a review, whatever platform you're on. That really helps, and it gets us fired up when we see those. So I appreciate you guys. Find us on LinkedIn. I'm Blake Bozarth, my co-host Chad Pike with a Y. Would love to connect with you there. Have an awesome day. See you next time. Peace.